Good afternoon, arts advocates, and welcome to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund's office hours with our arts advocacy team. Thank you to those of you who have sent us kind notes, thanking us for these webinars and the information that they contain. We are humbled and will continue to provide the best and most relevant information as possible during these challenging times. My name is Jay Dick, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Partnerships here at Americans for the Arts. I'm a 50-something white gay cis male with short brown hair, a graying beard, and I'm wearing a red shirt. I'm currently in my home office surrounded by mementos from my life. I'll also be serving as your moderator today. Americans for the Arts is committed to accessibility, and this includes our speakers offering visual descriptions of themselves, which makes the webinar more accessible for audience members that are blind or have low vision. Additionally, there are Zoom-generated closed captions for audience members. You can access the closed captions by selecting the CC button for closed captions in your Zoom toolbar. This webinar also includes live American Sign Language interpretation, which you can access with the globe icon in the Zoom toolbar and select ASL interpretation. Please click Interpretation in the Zoom toolbar and select American Sign Language. We welcome Amber and Tim, our interpreters, and thank them for their help today. Today, we have the Q&A feature of the Zoom available for you to ask questions of our speakers throughout the webinar. We will do our best to answer all the questions, either through the Q&A feature or aloud with the presentations shared from our speakers. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to you in the next week. You will also be able to find the slides and additional resources on our website. And that link is being shared now. In the event that we don't answer all of the questions, please reach out to Americans for the Arts Public Policy Manager, Olivia Tarpley, so we can keep in touch. And her email is being dropped in now too. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next few days to week. We have two panels for this webinar. The first will be our outside guest speakers, and a second panel will be with members of our arts advocacy team. For each panel, we invite you to type in Q&A questions into the Q&A box. I want to introduce to you again our arts advocacy advocacy team. They are myself. If you go to the next slide, please. Myself, again, I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Partnerships. Tushar Swain is our Director of Public Policy. Nina Oslu-Tunsley is our Executive Director of the Arts Action Fund, along with Chief Counsel of Government Affairs at Americans for the Arts. Olivia Tarpley is our Public Policy Manager, and I will also wish to thank Heather Flanagan, our Manager of Artist Engagement and Accessibility Policy, and Morgan Fernari, the Arts Action Fund Manager, who are working behind the scenes to make sure everything goes wonderfully for us. We also welcome our guest speakers today, who will talk about the state of the arts education and in the current political climate. We'll be joined by Alex Nock, who's Principal at Penn Hill Group, and Eddie Torres, the President and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. I will now turn it over to Olivia, who will be moderating this panel. So Olivia, over to you. And welcome Alex and Eddie.
Thank you so much, Jay. We really appreciate it. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Olivia Tarpley, and I'm the Public Policy Manager here at Americans for the Arts. I'm a white woman with dark brown hair and wearing a gray textured blouse today. I'm seated in my office in Washington, D.C. with a bookshelf and art on the walls behind me. It is my privilege to introduce our guest speakers today. We have Eddie Torres and Alex Nock with us. Eddie is a social change servant leader in the nonprofit and philanthropic public sectors, currently serving as the president and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. Previously, Eddie served as Deputy Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for New York City, where they played a leadership role in the city's long-term sustainability plan and the city's first cultural plan. They also conducted a study of the diversity of the city's cultural organizations and provided support for those groups. Eddie is featured in the Rutledge Handbook of Urban Cultural Planning, discussing the work that they did for the city of New York. And prior to joining New York City government, he was a program officer with the Rockefeller Foundation, supporting arts and culture, employment and access, and resilience. Eddie has also served at the Ford Foundation and Bronx Council on the Arts. and he serves on the board of directors of United Philanthropy Forum, as well as serving on its public policy committee. Welcome, Eddie. And I am also going to go ahead and introduce Alex. Alex Nock brings 25 years of experience in federal education, disability, labor, and health policy to Penn Group. During his time in Washington, D.C., Alex has been part of every piece of major federal education and disability policy legislation. At Penn Group, Alex manages a wide array of clients across the full spectrum of policy areas. Prior to his position with Penn Group, Alex served as the Democratic Deputy Staff Director for the U.S. House Committee on Education and Labor. He has led numerous reauthorizations while working on Capitol Hill and has played key roles in advancing and securing the passage of two major higher education budget reconciliation bills in 2008 and 2010, as well as the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act. Alex was previously the director of the Commission of No Child Left Behind, which was a bipartisan independent effort to improve the No Child Left Behind Act. Thank you so much, Eddie and Alex, for being here with us today. We'll give you both just a moment to say hi and share your visual descriptions before we jump into our questions.
Great, thank you. We're really appreciative of the opportunity to be with you. I'm Eddie Torres. I present as a cisgendered male with dark skin and a white beard. I'm wearing round glasses and a dark blazer, and my backdrop is a Grantmakers in the Arts logo in purple and white.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Nock. I am a white male with unfortunately gray hair and not so gray beard. I'm wearing a black shirt, and my background is green trees here at a rest stop in North Carolina.
Awesome. Thank you both. So you all, like we've talked about, work on a wide range of issues. Today, we're going to focus on just a couple of them. And really to get us started, we've been tracking some of the arts education legislation that's being reintroduced in Congress this session. So we at Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund, we're really excited to see that the Arts Education Act, which is led by Representative Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon and a few other Democratic leads, was bipartisan for the first time this Congress, with Mr. John Bacon of Nebraska on it. Could you all talk about the success in getting the legislation bipartisan this Congress, and perhaps how this could be a template for making other pieces of arts education legislation bipartisan?
Eddie, I'm happy to start.
Please.
If that helps.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So first, I think, Olivia, as you know, and maybe some of our viewers know, Congresswoman Bonamici is a big leader in the arts, maybe one of the biggest leaders in Congress, and came to Congress back several years ago with this passion already as part of her. And she routinely looks to do things bipartisanly, as certainly AFTA knows and Grantmakers in the Arts knows. We've been working on the Arts Education for All Act for many years with Congresswoman Bonamici, and she has routinely prioritized trying to get a Republican to also co-sponsor that bill. She actually has two Republicans on it now, John Bacon and Brian Fitzpatrick. John Bacon from Nebraska and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. So I think that's really a testament to her hard work on that, Olivia, where she has year after year consistently worked the House floor, literally going up to members of Congress herself. Very old school, right, Eddie, to actually have the member talk to other members and not just send letters and stuff like that and tweets around. But she is someone who really works with her members, both Democrats and Republicans, and has really sought out bipartisan support for that bill. So I think it's really a testament to her strong work. And I know that, through the work we've done with Eddie and Grantmakers of the Arts, we couldn't be happier with seeing that there's bipartisanship for that bill.
Awesome, thank you. Getting a little bit here into some of the other arts education things happening at the federal level, focusing in though on the Department of Education. There's been a lot of changes, as I'm sure we all know, at the department since the beginning of the year, since the Trump administration entered office. Could you all talk some about some of those changes, maybe thinking first specifically about how some of the reduction in force directives have changed the department, maybe what departments have been most directly impacted by those changes?
Alex, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you, Eddie. So, obviously, for folks watching that have followed this issue, the department laid off about 1,300 employees. Some additional employees took early buyouts, I guess might be the best way to describe them. So the department's down to about half of its existing employees. Two offices, Olivia, really bore the brunt of that, but there are other impacts as well. And so that's the Institute of Educational Sciences, or the Education Research and Statistical arm of the department, pretty much was hollowed out. The only office within that institute that really didn't see a reduction in force was the office that administers research around special education. But most notably, I think for a lot of the folks that might be on this webinar, the National Center for Education Statistics that runs NAEP, which has in the past done an assessment on the arts and arts knowledge of students in K-12 schools, was pretty much hollowed out, unfortunately. It's down to 2 or 3 employees. Now, the contract that actually operates NAEP is still in place, and actually just this week, the department initiated the process to show that they were going to do NAEP in 2026, and that's the math and reading side of NAEP, not necessarily the art side, but there was a question about whether or not they were going to initiate and follow that through with the massive reduction in IES. It was way over 100 employees, it's down to like 20. So a huge loss in terms of that. Also, the other major office that was impacted was the Office of Federal Student Aid. That's the office that obviously administers student aid, which is a huge process at the department. They lost about a third of their employees, and the word on the street for people like me is they want to downsize even more. Obviously, this is your office that controls the FAFSA and student lending and things like that. So it comes, what happens might still be in store for things. Also, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, which obviously, administers programs like arts education, right, at the department, also lost a fair number of employees. I think the question in my mind is Ed puts out certainly big formula programs like Title I, and special education, and career and technical education grants. Yes, it makes, available Pell grants and student loans. Those are big functions. Those offices are still around, but can they hold some of the competitions that they had held before? The department does a fair amount of competitive grants, and that takes people to issue the notice, people to score the applications that come in and do peer review, people to announce the notices. And frankly, it's the middle of May. As Eddie and I would tell you, they're a little behind in announcing some of these competitions. So I think bandwidth plus, Olivia, I'd be neglectful if I didn't mention a general thrust of the Trump administration to possibly not put all the money out that Congress actually intended it to put out and that passed in the law. These are big questions now. So the reduction in force, the lack of clarity around when money might be coming from the department that normally I would call blocking and tackling, to use a football reference there, normal stuff. It does is a little bit in question now. Now, one good piece of news that we were just talking about earlier this week, right, Eddie, is the department did put out Title I allocations. So the biggest K-12 program that's out there that is a big funder of the arts and arts education in a lot of school districts, those allocations have been announced. School districts, can have them for planning purposes. I will say if I were a superintendent running a school district and it was the middle of May and that's the first time I heard about these, I'd be a little worried because I'm trying to do my budget for next year. But they did put them out, so I think that's a good sign. But you led this off with the right word. Lots of changes have happened, and I think we're still seeing the impact of where those come.
And one point for clarification that you've articulated really well, Alex, that I think the federal government is not making clear, which is the stated goal of returning control over education to the states is actually misleading. As it stands, states control education. Curriculum happens at the state level, not the federal level. All that happens at the federal level is allocation of resources, particularly for those that are poor, for people who have disabilities, etc. To say that you want to return control to the states is misleading. If the states were put in control of all of those things would be starved. It's just about resource allocation. And the states don't have the resources to take that on as it stands.
Yeah, and I apologize if I was using an acronym that someone. I live in Washington D.C. and all we live and do is live in those acronyms. Olivia, if I didn't describe something properly, let me know.
I do see this comment in the chat. So we will try to make sure we give those full titles there. So these really great points. Thank you both. And I think, Eddie, that's so true that the curriculum and everything happens education-wise at the state and local level. Like, I think about how much local school boards are involved in the local education. And so I think that these are all really helpful and clarifying points here. If we stick with the funding piece a little bit more here, just as a deeper question about maybe specifically the Title I allocations or block grants more generally, as far as how that money is dispersed, does it go directly to the head of the state education agency? Does it go to the governor's office? Is that something that the Trump administration might change, or have you heard any whispers about changes there?
Yeah, so for the most part, the laws dictate where the money goes. And very often in major federal education programs that are at the K-12 level, Olivia, it's the state educational agency that gets the money. Sometimes there's a governor role to consult, to sign off on state plans and stuff like that. But generally, the money flow goes through the state educational agency. There are some exceptions. There are some federal or local programs like Impact Aid, where the money goes directly to school districts. That's uncommon. There's, of course, competitive grants for school districts and nonprofits apply, as I think many folks know, but generally the state educational agency gets the money legally. Eddie knows this. I say this a lot. Legally, that's what's supposed to happen. I will say, you said this, Olivia, and Eddie, you were saying this too, there's a lot of norm breaking going on. So I would say, though, the laws are pretty clear about where the money goes when it's a formula program to the state educational agency and then down to local school districts by prescribed statutory law-based formulas that should still be followed. The department has generally said that it's going to follow Title I allocations, and it seems like that's what they're doing. What we don't know as much about, Olivia, is programs like Title II of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, otherwise known as ESEA. You've heard that term thrown around before. That has not, the department has not spoken to that, as well as Title III, Part A of the same law, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That is a formula grant program that provides money to states, state educational agencies for English language learners, right, and helping them learn English. The department has not opined on either Title II, which is professional development for teachers, or Title III, which is English language aid for English language learners.
Thanks, Alex. What do you both think are some of the opportunities and actions that advocates can take to really show support and the importance of the Department of Education? I know there's been a lot of news swirling over the past several months about, well, of course, not only the changes at the department, but broadly speaking, threats to the department's existence potentially. And so I'm wondering, how can folks work with members of Congress, within coalitions even, to really show support for the Department of Education and its essential programs and functions.
And I can start on that, Eddie, but I think we probably would say the same thing about this because we were just talking about this week. The importance of making sure your elected leaders in the House and the Senate and other partners you work with understand the impact of federal money or a program in your area, right? Like if Title I money is really important to a school district and it funds an arts education program, or Title II money of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the SEA, funds professional development, including for teachers who are arts teachers or arts teaching professionals, right? That's the sort of stuff you really need to talk about because members of Congress, they have a lot of income. They're voting on foreign affairs, they're voting on funding for something, they're voting on higher ed, unless they focus on domestic stuff. They're voting on international affairs here. They're voting on a lot of stuff, and they and their staff may not always understand what a school district or a local nonprofit uses their federal funds for. This is what we use it for. This is why it's important. This is how it adds value to the teaching, to the learning. I think, Eddie, you would probably also argue the local economy and things like that. All those things are really key to put a picture in your leaders' minds that help with. It's unlikely that an average advocate can go talk to the Secretary of Education just because he's only got so much bandwidth, right? And that sort of stuff. Your local members of Congress in the House and your state, your senators in the Senate, that's what they're there for. You need to educate them so they go talk to people like Secretary McMahon. And we have seen where members of Congress have pushed back. This administration has kind of said, hold on a second, let's see what we need to do. Obviously, working with partners is critical as well. If you're one voice, think about partnering and many, many voices getting together to talk about the importance of a particular program the department funds or something like that. I think people should be a little cautious about just saying, oh, we've got to preserve the department. That doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. Got to talk about what the department gives you. Eddie, I thought you described it really, really well about how these funds go to help certain populations that without these funds just wouldn't get the services they get now. But Eddie, what would you add to that?
Well, one of the things that's impressed itself upon me whenever, you and I and our other colleagues have visited representatives on the Hill, we tend to assume that expertise means numbers, it means statistics, etc. But people are moved by stories, and they say so in plain English. If you have an experience of those federal resources positively impacting the students in your community, in your family, they want to hear those stories. They are genuinely moved by those stories. And if that's your local representative on any level, they will be moved by those, whether you submit them in writing or show up in person, either visiting a staffer or even speaking at a hearing. I used to be, this was at the local level, but I used to be a deputy commissioner. Hearings matter, and everyday people's stories actually matter. They get listened to and they actually move people.
Thank you both. That is very helpful. The sharing stories, I think that it does, Eddie, I think you're so right, help members to really understand the direct impact in their district. I'm actually seeing just here in the Q&A, which I know we'll have time for, but folks are even curious, like if they live in a solidly blue district, even with a member that's already supportive, it sounds like passing the story along regardless, just so there's like a large bank of stories is a helpful thing to do. So I think that we talk a lot about advocacy, and it's such a challenging moment in so many ways. I know that a lot of advocates that we talk to and that we hear from regularly have some frustration with some of the conventional processes. Congress has a lot of traditions and rules that they follow, and yet we have an executive branch that is really not doing things by the book in so many ways. So what would you all say as far as advice or thoughts for folks to still participate in the process, or kind of how do we balance that tension of maybe some activism, but also the kind of conventional advocacy. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'll ask you to weigh
I
in
mean,
also,
obviously,
please. Yeah. Oh, I was going to say,
no, go ahead,
I'll
Eddie.
ask you
Please,
to
after
weigh.
you.
I was going to say, Alex, I'll ask you to weigh in also. But one of the things also that has impressed itself upon me over my time, I've been at Grantmakers in the Arts for 8 years, is that power is not static. So when it comes to advocating in a blue district, the fact of the matter is that the majority does change over time, and so who doesn't have power, at this moment in time won't remain that way indefinitely. And, as Alex says all the time, advocacy is a long game. Ultimately, it's about relationships over transactions. And so when it feels like it's not worth your time right now, that's only right now. I mean, you want to have built a relationship when it is the right time.
100%. One of the best examples of long-time advocacy involves healthcare in this country. If you talk to then President Bill Clinton and the First Lady at the time, Hillary Clinton, and talked about their efforts to pass universal health care, sometimes pejoratively called Hillary Care, at the time in the early mid 90s or so. They fought a battle to try and get that done, and it didn't happen, obviously, at the time. Fast forward, 16 years or so, and then President Barack Obama passes what is sometimes colloquially referred to as Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. Whether you like or don't like, Obamacare, it's almost immaterial. That is an example of healthcare advocates and others staying true to their advocacy, and for years pushing and pushing. And Eddie, what I often say too is, advocacy meets opportunity, and that then creates this, nexus, for, something to happen. That is a super great story of, that happening. So also, in some ways, Olivia, the bill you led off with, Arts Education for All. Eddie, you and I and AFTA in general have been working on that bill for several Congresses, trying to help Bonamici get a Republican. Lo and behold, this Congress should get 2 Republicans to sign on. We have consistently not given up on that. I often say you have to keep advocating, as Eddie made this great point. You never know when the people that agree with you, or that you can cause to see the value of your views, are in power, and you can take that opportunity to do that. Just a couple years ago, AFTA and Eddie worked very closely together to make sure the Older Americans Act included direct services to seniors in the arts, right? That was something that we added. It was a natural kind of setup where we had advocate on that. Congresswoman Bonamici was the chair of the subcommittee. That mattered a lot. And we brought this to her, and she said, let's do it, right? So it made sure that program has an explicit call out on that. It's the perfect opportunity. You just can't ever stop advocating, because you never know when that opportunity can be seized. Your values and your mission are the same. It's when you can, take advantage of the opportunity to ensure it's enshrined in federal policy or state policy, right, Eddie? It's certainly not just federal policy that matters here.
Great. Thank you both. Broadening out a little bit, kind of, and we've already done this beyond the arts education issues. And I know that Eddie, especially the work that you all do with Grantmakers and the arts, you touch so many different policy areas. And so I'm wondering kind of what are your ideas about solidarity and community? I know there are so many different issues, of course, that touch the arts, but like there's, accessibility and disability work, and different artists and creative workers initiatives. So what are your ideas about solidarity and community, especially in this moment?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, one of the things that has impressed itself upon us, as long as we've been at Grantmakers in the Arts, which is, about 8 years now, was, the issue that the arts don't exist without artists, and artists are workers. And fairly often they're gig workers. Fairly often they're folks who have a number of part-time jobs or seasonal jobs. And the pandemic really showed us how vulnerable gig workers are, to the point where our federal government actually expanded unemployment insurance to cover them for, all of a year. But nonetheless, we specifically, explicitly advocate for portable benefits for gig workers, and that includes artists. Similarly, we advocate for artists with disabilities. And when we realized we were being successful, we also realized that we were endangering artists' federal benefits, because the limits on how much money a person with a disability can have before they're bumped off of their federal benefits was set in the late 1980s and has never been adjusted since. So we advocate for lifting the caps on those benefits, on those assets, and indexing them to inflation for the first time ever. So we think that those and policies like those are really important to make the art world supportive of artists in a way that's essential.
Thanks, Eddie. I see my colleague Jay has popped on, which tells us that it's a good moment to maybe turn to the Q&A here. I see that Kimmy has asked, for those of us in red or purple districts, do you have advice on how to reach our community members who are patrons but may have voted for the administration that is prompting all of the, changes and funding cuts?
I mean, it
Yeah,
seems that,
so
well, I was going to say, if they are in fact patrons, they certainly value, you have an overlap in terms of their valuing your work, So simply, I mean, you don't have to necessarily stand on ideology, just make clear you like our work. Our work runs on a budget, and if our budget is cut, the work is cut. And you can simply say that above and beyond any ideological positions you hold. Alex, what would you add to that?
that's right. That's right. I don't think most people, whether they voted for or against Trump, thought about some of the changes, Olivia, that we've seen from this administration. And again, Eddie made the perfect point. If you're talking to someone that values the work you do, that values your role in the community, they should be alarmed at some of this stuff. It wouldn't make logical sense for them not to be. So that's something where they can still like the administration in other areas, but this is something where they should communicate impact, like what Eddie talked about, the stories, the value. If they have data, great. But, definitely don't, I would say, overlook them as allies if they're normally allies to you in other arenas. Talk to them. Maybe they don't want to do that, but maybe they do.
Great. Thank you both. We've got another question from the audience here. What is the formal, where is the arts education for all bill now? Is it being tagged into something, is it kind of in a broader bill, or where does the legislation stand right now?
Yeah, so right now, technically that bill has been introduced. Congresswoman Bonamici is collecting co-sponsors, i.e. other members of Congress that want to add their name to it as an official supporter. I think the great thing about that bill, Eddie, I think this is okay still to say, is we worked, and Olivia, your team worked with, Congresswoman Bonamici on this as well. It's a bit of a bill that you can take apart and use in different areas. It's designed, it touches upon the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Juvenile Justice Act, research funding at the department. It's designed to kind of what it says, arts education for all, reaching across the board with numerous programs. So what we have generally done, and I know that Congresswoman Bonamici has focused on this strategy as well, is looking for opportunities when, hey, the Congress wants to look at, Title I policy. Well, Bonamici has a bill that addresses that. Let's put that in. It wants to look at education research. So, Bonamici's in the minority. She's unlikely to get a markup on her bill. A markup is when a committee formally brings up the bill and actually votes on it and votes on whether to advance or not. But as these issues come up, she is like ready with her ideas to say, I got ideas on how to advance arts education across all of the federal education programs. So right now, it's probably not going to see action, but don't sleep on the elements of that bill because it's designed to be used in different situations.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. We have another question here inquiring about the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is we've kind of talked about, is the current iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Our audience member here asks, will the Every Student Succeeds Act continue to exist with the current time? Perhaps what they're wondering is, are there threats to it, or what are, how should it be protected maybe?
So the Trump administration is the executive branch. They cannot do away with a law that Congress enacted. Judicial, executive, legislative, right? They cannot implement a law, but they cannot actually repeal a law. That's not their role. So I don't think the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or its latest iteration, as you said, Olivia, the Every Student Succeeds Act, goes away. I think the question is going to be, as the Trump administration decides, do they want to fund something or not, which again brings up the issue of legally, are they doing something? As Eddie knows, I say that word legally a lot these days. I don't, Congress is not looking to take apart that law per se. It's not looking to defund Title I. It's not looking to defund after school programs, lots of really broad bipartisan interest in funding those programs. I think the threat doesn't necessarily come to the law itself or the act. I think the threat comes to how the department will administer the money that Congress gives it to, like Eddie was saying, that it gives it to a state, that gives it to a local, that gives it to a nonprofit to provide certain services to those populations Eddie was talking about. That's what's kind of at question. So I don't know if the act needs protecting so much as its implementation does, I might say.
Thank you, Alex. It's very helpful. I'm going to try to squeeze two kind of last minute questions in here. So we'll start with one about an executive order. So is there guidance on how Executive Order 14218, which is called Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Open Borders, impacts arts organizations that apply to and receive funding from the NEA for programs within the public school system that serve undocumented youth? And maybe we also can provide a follow-up answer to this after if that's more helpful, but any initial thoughts here about, and maybe more broadly, like executive orders and how they might impact arts education programs?
Well, I mean, similarly, from what I understand, it's actually similar to Alex's earlier response, which was that an executive order is not a law. So one. Two, the administration's greatest tool right now towards sort of effectuating what they're expressing in these executive orders is around allocation of resources. So the NEA applicant, the sort of hypothetical NEA applicant, there's a good chance that that person has gotten their grant rescinded or revoked above and beyond the work they're doing with an immigrant community. The legality of that is an open question, but nonetheless, I think that's going to be more of the issue than can I apply with my immigrant-focused program. Alex, does that sound right to you?
No, completely agreed. I often say executive orders are instructions to agencies, and the agencies have to carry them out. That's not to minimize the fact that the Trump administration is putting out executive orders. Just you have to see where that flow is. So look, Eddie absolutely said this right. We've seen massive terminations, right, Eddie, at the NEA in terms of grants, staff too. So this administration is looking to basically do a USAID, or the U.S. agency that funds a lot of overseas foreign assistance programs, doing a takeover and a just elimination of the agency, the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, other things like that. So, they are attacking these agencies and deciding what they do and don't want to fund as part of them. That executive order is just, the tip of kind of this issue. Like, I think the larger question is, and there are lawsuits, right, Eddie, of course, on this, where the courts are, courts are generally not falling on the administration's side, generally, when these big actions have happened, but we have to see where this goes. But that executive order is just one piece of the puzzle here in terms of a broader policy agenda where they're looking to defund things they simply don't agree with. And I think now the question is, where does Congress position itself? We haven't seen as much of that yet, Olivia, right? But where do the courts position themselves when people bring up these issues?
Eddie and Alex, we have really appreciated your time, and just some little maybe closing remarks. We did have a question kind of towards the top of our conversation about any resources or like visuals that you have, visuals and or like policy memos that either of your organizations have. Do you have suggestions for resources for folks moving forward that they can use to educate leadership or members of their community?
Yeah, I put a couple of links in the chat. One is just a document that's publicly accessible and people can add to it, where we're tracking the news, but we're also tracking, our community is the grant making community. So we're tracking what our community is doing in response, new funds, things like that. So, by all means, take a look at that. I also put a link into the chat for our public policy and advocacy page, which is mostly funder education around what funders can support by way of their by way of nonprofits advocacy and lobbying. So if those are helpful, and I think we have a bunch of links. Oh, okay, you can't see the chat. All right, so I can send them to after the fact. So we have a bunch of links to other resources within those.
Thank you both so much. We really appreciate all of your insights and information and just for the conversation and all of the work that you're both doing. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, both of you. And so, Eddie, one thing, when you go to drop the link in, change the drop down to, instead of hosts and panelists, I think it's hosts and everyone or something like that.
Brilliant.
And there's a couple questions in the Q&A. Eddie, if you can stick around and look at the Q&A and answer via typing out, that'd be wonderful too. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Olivia, for a wonderful panel on arts education. We're going to switch it over now to our second panel with Nina and Tushar here at Americans for the Arts, to give you a little bit of an understanding of an update of what's been going on since the last time we all came together. And there's always something going on. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina and Tushar and let you have at it. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go first. This is Nina Oslu-Tunjali. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts Action Fund and Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs at Americans for the Arts. I am a Middle Eastern woman with long black hair and an arts vote background that was designed exclusively for the Arts Action Fund by Shepard Fairey. I am going to cover two updates, and one is regarding the National Endowment for the Arts, and the second is regarding the Library of Congress. Some of these updates, most of these updates I'm going to give you are posted with additional resources of where to read more about it on our breaking news timeline that I'll ask Morgan to add to the visible chat so all of you can see it. But the one regarding the NEA just happened, so that won't be on the timeline. So this week, first of all, I'm going to say, as we know, earlier this month, the NEA on May 2nd released a series of terminations and rescissions of withdrawal of offer letters that never made it to the award level. We have since tried to request a Freedom of Information Act, also known as FOIA, and to get a list of those organizations to see what the commonalities are, how we can reach out to them if they needed help with their appeal process or closing out by May 31st. Unfortunately, we were not able to be given those lists. We were told that they need to complete the appeal process. Until that is done, they cannot release the list in terms of privacy for those organizations. It seems counterintuitive, but this is what we have to live with. But just to remind everybody, the appeal process for that first round concluded on May 9th. From what I understand, the NEA probably received over 1,000 appeals. So they are bogged down with responding to those appeals. Many of those that were terminated were given a month to complete spending down those funds so that they could recoup as much as possible from the NEA. So that deadline is coming up on May 31st. It's a combination of spending as much of those funds as possible by the May 31st deadline, but for many, it is merely completing your final financial reports. Many had already received as much of the funds as possible, and they just need to complete their financial reports. However, this week, a second round of emails were sent out. We believe it is probably under 800 organizations that received this primarily termination notices, no longer rescissions of offer letters. And those terminations, again, are being given a month to spend down their funds to June 15th. Some of them already had spent all their funds. In fact, I think the great majority had already spent down their funds. So it's merely an issue of uploading your receipts so that you have all the money and you can keep all the money and complete your financial reports that will be due to the NEA by June 15th. There is probably an appeal process. I didn't read closely that one letter to see if there is an appeal available for those, but in fact, I think there is. And I just want to say that if you feel like you have gotten all the funds or will be able to upload enough of the receipts to get all the funds by June 15th, I don't think that there's a need to still appeal. However, if you have personal attorneys that are advising you to make the appeal on other grounds, please follow what your attorneys are telling you, because it really is a case-by-case scenario based on the unique facts of your award. But if it's just about dollars and cents, and you've gotten all the money, or think you'll be able to cover all the receipts to get all those funds, I don't think you probably need to make that appeal. That's the NEA update. On another escalating issue is what's going on with the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress is actually part of the legislative branch. It was created by Congress to provide content that they need, research, Congressional Research Service, copies of books, music, actual instruments, things like that, have been retained by the Library of Congress for the benefit of Congress and the general public by extension. However, the executive branch comes into play in one area, and that is the appointment of who the Librarian of Congress is. And on May 8th, President Trump did terminate very quickly upon notice, receiving notice that Carla Hayden, the longtime Librarian of Congress, who was appointed by President Obama, she was in the 9th year of her 10-year appointment. Her appointment is now canceled. I believe there might be some legal issues behind it too, but for now, the appointment has been canceled. And under the Library of Congress, there are other sub-agencies, and one important agency that is very relevant to artists and content creators is the U.S. Copyright Office, is also an extension of the Library of Congress, also considered a legislative branch. And just short number of days after the Librarian of Congress, who oversees the Copyright Office, the Trump administration and temporary appointees at the Library of Congress also dismissed the director of the U.S. Copyright Office. So that has caused a lot of turmoil. And because it's part of the legislative branch, it is also causing turmoil in terms of what kind of access of really confidential data that is unique to Congress, copyright applications that have not yet received their copyrights, also an issue of what is accessible now, because as we've seen with what Doge is doing, it is collecting a lot of sensitive data, and it's still not known what they're doing with the data. And so I believe some legal issues are arising as a result of both of these two actions, especially with the complexity of the president can certainly terminate and change things happening within executive branch agencies, but his role is just the appointment and termination ability of these two federal agencies. The rest is legislative content. So some real issues are happening here, even closing out access to some of these temporary presidential appointees to replace on a temporary level until a permanent replacement is made for these offices are happening. So stay tuned. The newspapers are absolutely covering this issue, and it is an issue that impacts our industry as artists and arts organizations. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Tushar to give some updates on the tax area.
Thank you, Nina. Hi there. My name is Tushar Swain. I'm Director of Public Policy at Americans for the Arts. I am a middle-aged man with brown skin, bald head, and today I am wearing a light blue shirt with a white wall and a couple of pictures behind me. I'm shifting gears just a little bit to give you an update on the reconciliation process that's occurring on Capitol Hill. Earlier this week, the House Ways and Means Committee passed its version of its tax reconciliation bill. The bill, the reason for the underlying reason for the legislation is to extend expiring provisions of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and also incorporate some of President Trump's new priorities. And this is being done through an expedited process called reconciliation. This is different than the fiscal year discretionary funding process where, for example, the NEA, some of the education provisions that Eddie and Alex talked about earlier are funded on a yearly basis. This is an expedited process that has to have a budgetary effect on either mandatory spending, so thinking, Medicaid, Medicare, revenue, so likely through tax policy, which is what this bill does, as well as the nation's debt. And so we've been tracking this, from a nonprofit perspective, nonprofit art sector, based on research from the Arts and Economic Prosperity 6 study show, close to $152 billion of economic activity. So some of the tax provisions in the bill could affect that sector. The first, some of the provisions that we've been tracking, the first one I'm going to talk about is really a big win for the nonprofit sector. as well as the nonprofit arts community. The non-itemizer deduction for those for charitable giving right now currently, because the standard deduction was increased in 2017, somewhere between 90 and 92% of Americans do not itemize on their taxes, and so they cannot take advantage of the tax deduction. We've already seen a precipitous decline in small donations, and so except for the COVID year when the non-itemizer deduction was temporarily instated for 2 years. And so big win, because we as the nonprofit arts community, as well as the nonprofit community in general, we're certainly advocating for this on the House side, but really we're hoping that this provision would be included in the Senate. And while we still think that that is going to, while we're hoping that that's going to occur a little bit more down the road, the fact that it is in the House bill really does speak volumes and really does increase our chances for having this in a final tax package that will probably be passed later on in the year. So kudos to the arts community who have been working really hard to try or to have that included into tax legislation. There are unfortunately some issues of concern in this tax bill for the nonprofit sector. It increases tax rates on private foundations. The current tax rate is, I believe it's 1.4%. And what the legislation would do is increase it based on your assets. So if you're a private foundation with assets of less than $50 million, you're still paying that 1.4% tax, but it incrementally increases until you get to over $5 billion, and then you're paying 10%. And so that obviously has could have huge ramifications for foundations and their ability to do charitable work. We've also been following tax on endowments. The current tax rate right now is 1.4%, and they've tried to institute the same thing here, where tax endowments valued between, for example, $500,000 and $750,000 per student would stay at the current 1%, 4% tax rate. But again, that elevated increase to where endowments valued at more than $2 million per student would be paying a 21% tax rate on their net investment income. We've seen the battles, between the president as well as some of these universities with larger endowments. Something to keep track on, and something that we're certainly concerned about. And then the final provision is something we heard a lot about from arts advocates last year. This provision that was included in the House bill would allow the Secretary of Treasury to unilaterally revoke nonprofit status from terrorist supporting organizations. And the Secretary would not be required to share full evidence or to ensure due process. So this was, this was a bill entitled H.R. 9495, which ultimately did pass the House of Representatives last year. It did not pass the Senate. I know that some of our friends, our nonprofit advocates, have been working with the Senate to not include this legislation in a or this provision in a final bill, or at the very least, ensure some more protections for nonprofit organizations. So again, just something to keep an eye on as we move on the tax reconciliation process this year. With that, I will turn it over to Jay.
Thanks, Tushar. So before we get to a couple questions, I'm going to start out with you, Nina. A couple people in the chat have put some Google documents about lists of NEA grant termination. So I'm leaving those in the Q&A box if anyone wants to see that. We've seen those and are familiar and been trying to work through those too. But if anyone else wants to see them, there's a Google Doc in the chat box. So Nina, I'm going to start off with you, ma'am. So several organizations received an expedited closeout notice this week. Do you know the reason and what is that?
Yeah. It is okay, I'm going to start off by saying many staff at the NEA chose the early retirement or early departure packages. So it's going to leave the staff very short staff and probably losing half the staff in this way. They were not terminated, but they let's just say they saw the writing on the wall. Doge had just been there, so they chose these early packages. As a result, there is not going to be enough staff to manage the large number of grants. And so one of the reasons that I understand it to be is that they would like to close out as many of these grants as possible so that they, and it's for also, I think, organization protection, to just finally close them out. And it's primarily a paperwork issue, it appears to me. However, there are certainly some organizations that are impacted and need to quickly spend down their funds so that they can submit reimbursements and get their NEA dollars. The second reason that some of these terminations are happening, and they're stated in their letters, is that they no longer fit in the priorities of the organization, of the NEA's direction of the 3 statutory areas involving public partnerships, state arts agencies, regional and local arts agencies, that kind of thing, arts education, and research. And then there are the 11 buckets of priorities that have been drawn from executive orders that the president has put out of the direction that they want to take all agencies, not unique to the NEA, all agencies, and that's involving everything from America 250 to support for HBCUs, things like that. They're all listed in the letters. The terminations are also related to that, in that you're getting this expedited closure because they're giving you a month to keep spending the money and then to close out because it's just no longer part of the direction that the NEA is taking. So I think it's a combination of 2 things. And there are thousands of grants that the NEA puts out. And so they probably have had to stagger it. But as I understand it, in terms of recon that I have, is that hopefully, but not certainly, this will probably be the last round that gets this.
Thank you, Nina. Got a couple questions. I'm going to ask us to be a little efficient with our answers here. So, because we're running a little bit out of time here. So Nina, then I'm going to go to Tushar after this question. Do we know what the status is of the 2025-26 NEA grants that were approved by the National Council on May 1st, including our town requests?
Are we talking about May 1st, 2024?
Yeah, I think, no, I think they're talking about that just happened.
Oh, so if they were just approved, they probably already, the NEA is probably determined because that they fit in these buckets. So if you haven't received some kind of either rescission offer or a termination, I think things are looking good.
It should be. And I know that they did approve grants there, so they are still moving
Yeah,
forward.
I understand that they were primarily public partnership grants, but if the person asking the question could confirm we're talking about 2025, then my answer stands.
Yeah, this is 2025, 2026 NEA grants.
Okay.
So it should be. So Tushar, do we know what were the caps on charitable deduction?
Oh, they were $150 for single filers and $300 for joint filers. It's a little bit lower than what was instated during the COVID Relief Act, which was $300 for single filers and $600. But it's a good place to start, and then hopefully we can increase that number in Senate legislation.
So Nina, do we know if DOJ was involved in the decisions of these grant terminations, or did they just visit?
I don't think that they were involved in individual grant decisions. I think that a plan was put forward to them of why they need to keep as many grants as they could, because while it's not spoken a lot about, they actually retained a lot of grant funding and existing awards based on trying to connect them to those 11 buckets in the 3 statutory areas, which I think DOJ signed off on. But there was probably a goal of how much to cut if they didn't fit into those buckets. So I think that there was pressure to cut and to stay within what the president wants to be affiliated with, which is what his priorities are and what the federal statutory. They had seen DOJ is learning as they go, let's say, and they saw the lawsuits that started quickly happening with other agencies. And so they knew not to get into trying to cut things that are federally statutorily required.
Perfect. And continuing on that, well, one of our attendees wrote, I was asked to sit on an NEA grant panel for the next round for grants submitted on in April. So they're guessing that they're still going forward, which is what we have been hearing, that the grants are still going forward.
Grants are still, this is, while these terminations are jarring, to say the least, there is still movement happening on another track.
So let's go back to terminations, Nina. So we do have a question. Our active 2025 grant was withdrawn, quote unquote. There is no evidence it ever existed on the REACH site. What is the difference between withdrawn grants and grants that you were talking about submitting their payments that are already in process?
Right. So the withdrawn, if you received a letter that said, we are withdrawing our offer to give you a grant, that means that it had gone through the cycle of going through the National Council on the Arts. The previous chairman under the Biden administration had approved it. And likely you are listed on a press announcement that happened in January that's on the website of the NEA of people that are being offered grants. So you probably went through that cycle if you received a letter that saying your grant was withdrawn. However, it never completed getting to the award level status, let's say. An award status is not only did you sign the letter accepting the offer and returned it, the NEA on their side have to go through several levels of processing that offer letter to make it into an award status. And because the award, the offer of a grant happened just days before the new administration came into office in January, on January 20th, that process never got finalized into an award. So that's why they're withdrawing it. Those that got termination letters or that required expedited closeout process are ones that actually became an award. They started using the award money, perhaps even used all of the award money, and they are literally just asking for there to be an expedited closeout cycle for you to finish up using your money by the end of May, or if you're in the second category, by June 15th, and finishing the paperwork of especially your financial closeout by that cycle. So one is an award that got the money, and the second was the hopes of getting the award by an approved grant offer that never made it into an award.
So one last question before we close out our office hours today. Nina, you're popular. Sorry, Tushar. Nina, you're popular today. I know I love talking about tax reform, but most people are looking to talk about NEA stuff here. I'm guessing there's little chance the NEA will notify applicants for the 2025-2026 grants of acceptance denial. Is that correct? And is it worth the work to apply for a fiscal 26-27 grant, the ones that are due in July 2025?
To the first question, I don't know the answer. That's a crystal ball question, and I don't know the answer. However, what I can say is they have now laid out what their priorities are. It's in those 11 buckets. We have them listed in our FAQs from our last emergency webinar, and perhaps someone could put a link to those FAQs in for us, Morgan. And so those 11 bucket priorities are listed. The state arts agencies, regionals, and hopefully in the future as well, the local arts agencies will continue getting their funds to serve their communities and states. The issue for individual organizations is if you can fit into one of those 11 buckets with some kind of a grant that you have a need for that fits into one of those buckets, I think it's worth the work and the effort to put in that application.
Thank you, Nina. So thank you, Nina and Tushar, for this part of our panel. We have a couple questions we weren't able to get to. I'm so sorry, but we'll make sure we keep track of them to get you some answers for that. So as we close out this session, as a reminder, we have a variety of tools to help you voice your thoughts to Congress. So please feel free to share these with your networks. There's gonna be links that are being dropped in. Don't forget to write or call your members of Congress using the link that you see on the screen there. We also have a great timeline to help you keep track of what's going on here in Washington, D.C. that the Arts Action Fund has put together. It's a wonderful tool. And please bookmark our Protect the NEA webpage, which we update with information that's going to be helpful to everyone as we go through this process. As a reminder, our next office hours are in 2 weeks on Friday, May 30th, again at 2 p.m. Eastern. So with that, have a great Memorial Day weekend this next weekend. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks for all that you continue to do in your home states, in your cities, to work to let elected officials and know what the value that the arts and culture brings to America. With that, have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Goodbye.